How do you find a good agent? I mean, the best thing to do is, I can give you the, I'll tell you what, I'll give you the name of my agent. My agent is Robert Stricker, and he's Robert Stricker, S-T-R-I-C-K-E-R. He's a real good guy. His number is 415-383-5817. And what I did is I used him on art and physics, and then everyone said you have to have a big New York agent if you're going to do a real big book. So when I wrote Alphabet versus the Goddess, I switched agents. And he's a nice guy. I took him up for dinner and I said, you know, Bob, I mean, we did a nice job with this book. I got to have a big New York agent. Well, it's the whole difference between being a little frog on a big pond and a big frog on a little pond. If you go with a big agent, they're busy. You know, they don't want to, you know, take your calls and whatnot. I need a lot of hand holding because the whole process is it's like buying a house. You know, it's a very traumatic, not traumatic, but it's an emotional, exciting and disappointing, and you know, so I like an agent that I can call and talk to rather than one that says, the secretary says he'll call you back and you don't get a phone call back. So I went with a big New York agent for the second book, and she promised me the sky. She said, we're going to get Gloria Steinem to write a thing for this book. I'm going to get you a big six-figure advance. So they go for again, it comes down to Viking, Simon & Schuster, Viking, and Random House are bidding on the book. So the lady it was an imprint from Viking that said, I have to have this book. And the woman from Riverhead, which was a subsidiary of Viking, said, I have to have this book. And then the woman from Random House said, I have to have the book. They get into a bidding war. Random House drops out at 60,000. At 70,000, the agent calls me and says, we have a problem. I said, what's the problem? He says, the editor from Viking just asked who we're bidding against. I said, what's that got to do with it? She said, well, we're bidding against Riverhead, and Riverhead was just purchased by Pearson Limited from England, so that Viking, Riverhead, Putnam, and Penguin are now under the same roof. And you are the first author that they will not allow one division to bid against another division because they don't want to, you know, what's the point? So I said, she said, you have to decide which publisher you want. I said, I have to decide. You know, I was like, I had a pencil in my hand. I broke the pencil. I was so upset. I said, let these people bid on this book. They said, no, they won't bid another dime. You know, you have to. So in the end, I said, it didn't happen the way I thought it was going to happen. So, and then I had another agent. I went to this big New York agent, and he kept this manuscript for 7 months, fiddling with it. And I said, well, what do you? He says, well, I really like it. I really like it. And then he took me out for lunch. He said, you know, I can't do this book because I'm doing a book just like it. I said, whose book? It was David Abrams' The Spell of the Sensuous. I don't know if any of you have read it. It's a really wonderful book. And it has a lot about the alphabet in it. He could have told me that 7 months ago. And God damn it, he hung on to that book for 7 months. And I then ran into this thing where had I got it from him earlier, I wouldn't have had that delay. So as far as proposals are concerned, if you submit a proposal and it gets turned down, your question was, should you write a new, what was the question? Did you write a new book? Oh, well, do you have an agent? Oh, well, see, that's the problem. They just don't want to deal with anybody without an agent. That's part of the problem. And so the other thing is, what you can do is, then the question comes up, do you want to self-publish? And self-publishing is now very easy to do, but it's a kiss of death. Because if you self-publish, number one, the bookstores don't want to carry your book, you know, because they don't have any, you know, there's nothing behind it. So, you know, you can try to sell it on consignment, but in the way the bookstores work is that if a book isn't moving off the shelves, they get rid of it. It's out of there, you know. It used to be that there were some wonderful bookstores that kept a huge backlog of books for, you could go in there and browse for hours, but nowadays everything is so profit-driven that, you know, Barnes and Nobles and Borders are telling the publishing book company what books they want to see. They tell the publishing houses, we want to see more of this kind of book or more of that kind of book. I mean, that's how driven this thing is now by these big bookstores, and I encourage all of you to support your local independent bookstores. I mean, they're all going out of business. I go on these book tours, and it's so painful that each time I go out, there's less and less bookstores to go to. And these indies are so much better. The people know their stock, and you know, it's a neighborhood bookstore. And yeah, I just hate to see them all going the way of the dinosaur. So I suggest, and if you self-publish, you know, the rules are that to get a review in a newspaper, it has to be a hardcover book. You'll hardly ever see a softcover book reviewed. So the only ones that do hardcover books are the major publishing houses, and then if the book is successful, they'll move it into a trade paperback, which is like this, and then if the book is really successful, it goes into the mass paperback market where you buy them in the airport. And the way it works is that you get 12.5% royalty on the hardcover books, and you get 7.5% on the trade paperback books, and you get 5% on the mass paperback books. And when I get my royalty statement every year, I get it twice a year. And by the way, what an advance is that they give you the money in advance against the royalties. So if they give you a $30,000 advance, you have to earn back $30,000 before you see a penny of the royalties. And what happens is, mysteriously, all kinds of extra charges appear. You know, it's sort of like getting a, you know, it's like you get your bank statement. First of all, they're all unreadable. You know, that's the other thing. They're so confusing to read. I'm a reasonably smart guy. I got good SAT scores in school. I have trouble reading this goddamn statement every time I get it. And what happens is, fortunately, these other books have earned back their advances, so that I now get royalty checks every 6 months from both of them, because they just keep selling because they got into the colleges. And the professors are recommending them as course books for classes. So I hear, in fact, I heard from 3 people on this meeting alone that the 2 professors that are using it for their classes, and somebody that told me that their child has read the book because they were recommended in class. So once that happens, now the book's just going to keep going, you know, because, and then you're looking for foreign rights. I tried to keep the foreign rights, and I couldn't, to get translations. So now I've had translations into foreign languages. You know, Alphabet's now been translated into about 6 or 7 different languages, and selling very well in the Spanish edition. And Art and Physics has been translated into Korean and Polish. I mean, I got an email from a little Korean girl doing a term paper on Art and Physics. That gave me a, you know, she says, he wrote me, she says, I'm writing my term paper on your book. And I thought, isn't that wonderful? This book is in Korea, my God. Anyway, so if you self-publish, then you're going to have to do a lot of legwork yourself. It's very hard. You know, there's a couple wonderful stories. The guy who wrote the Celestine Prophecy, Redford, isn't it? Redford or something like that. Anyways, he self-published because he couldn't find a publisher. And the book started to develop a cult following and started to sell. And then what happened is he started to sell so many copies of it that he finally managed to get a publisher to pick it up and then really promote it. That woman who, Anita Diamond, who wrote the Red Tent, she wrote that novel. They printed 1,500 copies. They sold 300. They had like 1,200 remainders. And they said, okay, we're going to throw these books out. We're going to remainder them now, meaning that you can, you know, you see them out in the front of the bookstore for $2. And she said, no, 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 don't remainder them. I'll buy all the remaindered books. She took the 1,200 books, and she personally sent one to every rabbi and minister, you know, in the country that she could find of the 1,200, and then the book took off, because all the rabbis' wives and the ministers' wives were all reading it, and the book became a national bestseller based on her efforts. So then there's that Wayne Dwyer who wrote What Color Is Your Parachute, I think. And what he did is he self-published or found a little publishing house. And what he did is he loaded up at the trunk of his car and the back seat of his car with books. And he drove across the country from bookstore to bookstore to bookstore and just said, take these books on consignment. You don't even have to pay for them. You know, if you sell them, fine, I'll get a percentage. If you don't, you know, you don't. You know. And he just literally hand sold the books across the country, and then he became a very well-known. So there are all these stories of what is involved and what you have to do Like I'm leaving on right after Labor Day to go on a huge multi-city speaking tour for Sex, Time, and Power, because I know that's the way you have to sell the books. Because I'm going to go to bookstores, and sometimes maybe 5 people will show up. I mean, I've been to bookstores where they've been so embarrassed because nobody showed up, and they had to call the staff to come listen to me, you know, because they don't want to embarrass. Or my favorite is when the homeless guy comes in with a clam box of some used food that he found. You know, he's your audience. You're talking to this homeless guy, you know. But I'm going to do it, and the reason I'm going to do it is because when I get a gig in a bookstore, the bookstore has a connection to the radio station. And they get me on the NPR station at 9 in the morning, and I talk to 1 million people. And then they get the local reporter to do an article on me, and I'm in the newspaper. So even though I may only have 10 or 15 people at the bookstore, that isn't going to happen unless I physically go to that town and show them that I'm putting out this effort to come to your bookstore to help you sell books. You help me. And of course, they want to sell your book because they're going to make some money too. So it's all kind of a interlocking thing. And which brings me to another thing, and that is, if you're going to be a writer and you hope to make it, you're going to have to be a public speaker. And most writers are terrible public speakers. And I don't know about you, but going to a reading where somebody stands up and reads from their book is like, oh my God, you know, I mean, who wants to, if I wanted to have them read from the book, I'll read the book. You know, I don't need to have somebody read it to me. And I've been to some readings that are just awful. And what you have to learn to do is, you know, my next book is going to be about Leonardo da Vinci, and I was reading how, you know, Leonardo was such a tremendous innovator that so many things that he did, we've now seen so many times that we don't even know that he started doing it. And one of the things he did in the Mona Lisa, which I was shocked to find out, is that up until Leonardo, every portrait painter only painted people from the this part up. They never showed their hands. And Leonardo da Vinci painted Mona Lisa's hands because he said hands are really important. And when I watch some of the speakers here, they don't use their hands. I mean, there's no gestures. Hands are really important. So you not only have to become a writer, but you're going to have to become an actor. Now, for some people like me, I love that stuff. I mean, I went into surgery because I found out I'm going to work in an operating room theater, you know. So it's important that you develop a style, and the best way to develop a style is practice in front of a mirror and make sure that you've got a lively delivery, otherwise you're going to put people to sleep. Another good way to do that is and this is good for writing. I found this worked out. When I wrote this book, and I did it with other things, is I'll tape record. You asked about dictating before. What I'll do is after I've written something, I'll dictate it into a tape. And then when I'm driving around, I listen to the tape. And it's amazing how you can hear things about something that you've written that you can't pick up when you're looking at it to read it. But you can hear it when you're listening to it. You say, oh, that doesn't sound right. That sentence is really bulky, you know. So that's another way. And the other thing is, I don't know about the rest of you, but when I read something off a computer screen is not the same as when I read the printed. And I'll write something, and I write something that looks really good on the computer screen, and then I print it out. And reading the printout, I mean, I have to check to make sure this is the same thing, because I'll see things in the printout that I can't see on the screen. So it's very important when you're doing that process is to do that over and over again. Okay, let me open this up to some questions. Anybody have questions about question?
One of the benefits of going with the traditional publisher, I understand, is you're talking about book tours and media and things like that. But I also understand that that's not necessarily part of the deal. That sometimes they don't do that, and you've got to be a marketer yourself.
Absolutely. Well, yeah. When I did Art and Physics, I said to the publisher, the night that he said the title of the book's going to be Art and Physics, I said to him, everyone said, get them to commit to a publicity budget, you know, because they got to put some money on for publicity. So I said to him, how much, Mr. Landis, are you planning on spending on publicity? And I remember him, he put his fork and his knife down, he says, spend on publicity? We're not going to spend a dime on publicity. You ought to be really happy that we're publishing your book. I said, I don't understand. You paid me money to write this book. You paid money to print this and hire an editor. Aren't you going to spend some money to promote it? He said, absolutely not. He says, we're going to see if it has legs. And if it starts moving out of the bookstore, we're going to get behind it. I was shocked. I said, what kind of business is this? This is nutty. So I had to do all that. I said, you set up the bookstores and I'll pay for it. So in the first book, I went around, paid my own way, paid for the hotels and whatnot, and the book started selling really well. It was on the bestseller list. The Los Angeles Times said this was a tour de force. The New York Times gave it a great review. And I thought, it's got legs. And they said, we're on to the next book. You contact us when you write the next book. I said, I was just shocked. I said, this is the craziest business I've ever heard of, that you would spend money making a product that you're not interested in selling. I've never heard anything like that. Crazy. So with the other books, they had a budget by then, because the bigger advanced they're on the hook. Because once they're on the hook, now they got to get their money back. So if they're giving you a lot of money to be up front, then they want to get it back. So with Viking, they had a certain amount of money, but I used up their money, and then I said, okay, here's the deal. You pay for the hotel rooms, I'll pay for the airfare, and you just keep booking these things for me. And I just went on a very extensive book tour, but it got it up on the national bestseller list. And then once it gets on the national bestseller list, you can put national bestseller at the bottom, and then somebody picks up the book and says, national bestseller, must be a really good book. So it's key. I'll tell you a little interesting marketing strategy that this young man just did that I just found out about. I have a friend of mine whose son just wrote a book called Chairman Mao in the Boardroom. And it's about guerrilla marketing. So he's a young kid, and he wrote this business book about what Mao Zedong would advise board of directors if he was running a corporation. So he sends an email around, of which, because my son's friends with him, and I'm on my friends, somehow I got this email, and it says, I would like you to all participate in a little guerrilla marketing. I would like you to buy my book from Amazon.com between 2:30 and 3 o'clock on this particular date. Oh, I got this email, and then on that particular date, the day before, he sent me another email. He said, tomorrow's the day, and the next day he said, 2:30 and 3 o'clock today, don't forget. So I'm trying to help out because I said, ordered a book from Amazon.com for him. So he managed to get everybody to do this between 2:30 and 3, and he went from 80,000 on the Amazon list to number 4. Whoa. And when he was number 4, he now has a national bestseller. So then he puts in his press kits, national bestseller. So CNBC picks that up and has him on the Squawk Box, and now he's got a national bestseller. And I thought to myself, this was a very clever marketing ploy. But it's almost, you have to do something extraordinary to get your hand up above the noise and say, notice me. Because there's so many, I walk into bookstores and I'm usually disheartened when I see how many books there are. I said, my God, look at all the choices people have, you know? And then that's just to read books. I mean, look at all the other things they can do. Watch movies or DVDs or, you know, whatever you want to do nowadays. Question? Question?
Query letter.
Sure.
Are you saying that if you get an agent, you let the agent run with things rather than...
No, you have to always be on top of your own thing. Like some woman just wrote me, what was it again? Yeah, somebody just wrote me. I get a lot of people trying to submit manuscripts to me. In the beginning, it's a good thing I wasn't a woman because I'd be pregnant all the time, you know. I mean, I just can't say to no, you know. And finally I got to the point, I said, you know, I got to stop doing this. I don't have time to read other people's books. I can barely have the time to write my own, you know, because they want a blurb or they want me some endorsement from me. So, and I remember how hard it was to get endorsements and blurbs, you know, what a painful process that is. Publisher calls you and says, you have 2 weeks to contact famous people and get them to say something magnificent about your book. You know, I mean, in the beginning, who do you know? You know, I told Richard Kogan yesterday this wonderful story about Gershwin that he didn't mention, and that I always think of as just a great story. And they said that George Gershwin, when he was at the height of his fame, they said, "What's the best part about being famous?" And he said, "The best part about being famous is I can call anybody in the world and they'll take my call." And I thought to myself, you know, Mr. President, George Gershwin's calling. I'll put him on. You know, I mean, that's one of the great pleasures of getting well known, is that when you call another author or someone, they'll take your call, you know, as opposed to being one of the people trying to edge into the circle, you know. So, where did I start with this again? What's that? Oh yeah, so I remember contacting people about blurbs, and you know, I said, "Would you please read this book and give me a blurb?" You know, and some people were very generous. I mean, people I didn't even know. In fact, Richard Seltzer gave me a blurb, great blurb, and I never even met the man. You know, I called, I wrote him, and I said, "Please, you're a fellow surgeon. Would you please read this thing?" And he did. So that's another process. My favorite story is I wrote I had one guy who wrote a wonderful blurb for me. I won't mention his name, and I said, "Oh, that's just wonderful." He said, "That'll be $500. And I said, "What?" He said, "Well, you don't think I do this, you know, this is how I make a living." He was a pretty famous guy, and I thought, I was kind of shocked. I said, "Whoa, okay, that taught me a lesson there." And then my other one was, I was on the board of Saybrook, and I was friends with Rollo May. So I said to Rollo, I was saving him. He was going to be my blurb for Art and Physics. So I called him and I said, "Rollo, I need you to give me a blurb." And he lived nearby. I'd stop by his house. He comes to the door and he's got these Coke bottle glasses. And he says, "I've just had cataract surgery. I can't read anything." I said, "Oh." He says, "However, I know your work. I've heard you speak at the Saybrook. So why don't you just write your own blurb and I'll sign it." I said, "You want me to write my own blurb?" "Okay, I can do that." So I said, "This magnificent piece of writing, never before, you know." So I wrote this great blurb, and I ran it past him, and he said, I said, "Is that okay?" He said, "Yeah, that's fine. You write anything you want." So at the last minute, I thought to myself, I looked at it because I was trying to be somewhat modest, and I said, "It needs to be peppier." I said, "This book is a tour de force." And then I went on, and I thought, so the first review that I received from any newspaper was from the Los Angeles Times, which starts out, "This book is a tour de force." And I said, "All right, okay." So, but blurbs that's another process. You know, you have to get the right people to say wonderful things about your book, you know, because that's the first thing that people turn around. They turn around and want to see who recommended the book. Question? Can you? Well, I have my email. That's another thing. I put my email on the back of all my books. And it's been a wonderful thing. I mean, I get contacted by people who, you know, because the one thing a writer wants to hear, you know, what do you think? Do you think this is any good or not? And I've received such wonderful emails from people and formed friendships with people around the world who've read these books and then felt moved. And now that people can contact you by email, you know, it's not like a phone call, so you can kind of screen it, you know. And it's wonderful. It's just, and I recommend that you do that because it's really nice to hear from people who have read your book and then feel that they want to contact you.
You respond to everybody?
I respond to, I don't get that many emails. I mean, I respond to everybody. You know, I mean, you know, some people want to engage me in some complicated, like some student wrote me the other day, "I'm writing a paper on your book. Can you answer these 12 questions? I don't have time for this, you know. Or they want to argue with me. They say, you know, I disagree with what you said. And you know, if you get started with that, it's very difficult because, you know, you just don't have time for that. My biggest problem is I just don't have enough time. You know, there's other books I want to write, there's other things I want to do, and it just seems like there's not enough hours in the day to get done what you need to get done. Which brings me up to the next point, is to find time in the day to do the writing. I find that the best time for me to write is early in the morning. That's when the phones haven't started ringing yet, and the house is quiet, and nobody, because it's very hard for me to do writing when I'm constantly being interrupted. So my MO is to get up very early in the morning and write first thing, when I'm freshest. I do my editing later in the afternoon or the evening, because editing is not the same as, creating. So I don't mind if the phone rings or something like that. I can go back and go back and clean up a sentence and whatnot and rewrite it. But you should have a routine, and the best routine, I think, is to write really early in the morning, you know.
Would you divide your time between being a surgeon and being a writer? And the second question is about writers.
Writers groups. Well, I think the first question is, everyone asks me the question, how did you find the time to, you know, if you ask the OR staff, they'll tell you that, you know, in the surgeons, you know, surgeons are, operating room schedules are like airline schedules, you know. The first plane that leaves in the morning always leaves on time, and then after that, the schedule gets knocked out of hell. You know, it just doesn't work. So there's many times where there's just dead time, there's just hours where you get bumped because there's an emergency, and you're sitting reading this old Field and Stream, you know, and it's 18 months old, you know. So what I do is I just take my work with me, and I'm just sitting there and just editing and writing, and you know, and then it takes such a long time to get the patient in the operating room and get him set up. I'm just sitting there and writing and editing and editing and writing, rather than just standing around like most of the other guys are doing, waiting to get the case get started. And I just, you know, if you have a passion, you will get it done. You know, I mean, when you read about J.S. Bach and what he had to go through to write his music, you know, and at the same time run this school and take care of all these kids and what. Everybody has these problems, and it's all a matter of, you know, what did Einstein say? It's 99% perspiration and 1% inspiration, you know, and that's what is involved in it. The second question was? Writers groups. I think writers groups are very good because, you know, people say, well, why are you still doing surgery? And, you know, writing is very isolating. It's very yin. I mean, it's sort of like, there are days when I sit in front of my computer and it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I have not shaved. I'm still in my bathrobe. I haven't talked to anybody. And I think, well, there's no way to live, you know? And surgery is very yang. I mean, you know, it's kind of like a sport. You go to a locker room, you change into a uniform, you see your other colleagues, you know, and then you go make something with your hands, you know, and looks good, finished. Next case, you know? So as a result, it's a totally different activity. And oddly enough, I have had my best ideas in surgery. And, you know, I did a lot of vascular surgery, and a lot of vascular surgery consists of sewing. You know, you're sewing a long line of a blood vessel. You're suturing one blood vessel to another blood vessel. And it's very meditative, you know. You kind of get into this rhythm. What I would do is I would start to get my breathing in order with the respirator, and then pretty soon I noticed that everybody in the operating room would go, you know, we're sort of in this meditate, and then suddenly these incredible ideas would occur to me when I get in these states, you know. And in fact, the reason that women are now, so many women are in surgery is because, you know, for years, the men wouldn't let, there's a real patriarchal, macho specialty. And we had a big sign out the door that said, do not enter, you know, inner sanctum, this is the operating room, don't cross this line. And the women for years used to say, well, what are you guys doing in there? We'd get dressed up in these long gowns and masks and hats. We'd all huddle together and like this. And one day the women came in and looked over our shoulder and they said, oh, you're sewing. Oh, we know how to do that. Wait a minute. So as a result, now over 50% of the surgical residents at UCSF now are women. Over 50%. But anyway, so, someone just asked me here, I just told them that I'm doing something I've never done before. I'm going to be 66, and I'm taking a sabbatical. I've never done that before, because I'm going out on this book tour. So I've decided, I told my office, I said, do not accept any new patients. I'm not going to do any new surgery till November, you know, because I don't want to be bothered with worrying about patients. So I had this last case to do, this old Russian lady who had gallstones for 40 years. I had her scheduled 2 weeks ago. She had to go see the cardiologist. They want to do some more tests. It kept getting delayed. Finally, they scheduled it for last Monday. I said, okay, let's get this case over with. And this is my last case. Of course, it has to be the most complicated case. For those who are in medicine, she had a cholecystoduodenal fistula. Her gallstone was eroding into her duodenum. I had to open this lady, take the two organs apart, repair the duodenum, worry about whether this is going to leak, whether she's going to get pancreatitis. You know, take it, and she's been in a hospital I sent her home yesterday. You know, and all this time I was worrying about whether or not she's going to be all right, and the complication. And I thought to myself, this is why I didn't want to have to be worrying about this. You know, I'm trying to prepare for this conference, which takes a lot of preparation, because that little talk that I gave yesterday took hours and hours and hours of memorizing it, so I didn't use notes, because I can't listen to people that read their speeches. If somebody's got something to tell me, if I wanted to read it, just give me the handout and I'll read it myself. I don't need somebody to make a complicated PowerPoint thing where they show what they're saying on the screen and they're reading it. I mean, I can do that. I mean, I can. So as a result, I think it's very important that you don't use any notes when you give a talk, and I'll let you a little secret about how I do this, and that is that I use the images that I show to be the prompts for what I have to say. So I'll have the images and I'll say, on this image, I'm going to say this. And on this image, I'm going to say these two things. So to the audience, it looks like it's very smooth because I'm not using any notes, but I've memorized the talk based on the images being used as prompts. And that's my little secret. So, question?
What about copyrights? Who owns the copyright if you need that?
The publisher owns the copyright. And that's part of the deal. You know, that's one of the reasons why you need an agent, because when you go to sign the contract is all them and no you. Every advantage goes to the publishing house. And if your agent is sharp and good, they'll fight for you. They even have lawyers now that you can hire that will go over these boilerplate contracts and get them so that they'd be a little more favorable to you. Like, for instance, I got the electronic rights to Art and Physics, which at the time in 1990, didn't seem like much, but now it looks like it might be worth something. But that you want to fight for as many advantages. Like, for instance, they make you pay to do the index. They want me to, chintzy thing. How much are you going to charge me to do the index? Well, I was going to charge you $3,000. No, that's way too much money for an index. I didn't know anything about this because you're on their playing field. You're a novice and they do this for a living. So you need to have somebody who knows what they're doing, especially when it comes to contracts. So, but they own the rights. They have the copyright. The good news is that, well, I think it's a terrible thing, but they just extended copyrights for 71 years now. I told my children that someday I'm going to have great-grandchildren that are going to be getting royalty checks, and they're going to say, who is this guy? Because 71 years is a long time going out into the future for these copyrights, but they keep extending them. Question way in the back?
Yes, when is the right time to contact the agent? Do you have a reference?
Okay, good question. When do you go? Okay, because if you go too early and the thing is too raw, when they turn you down, you have to polish and polish and polish, and you have to then have other people read it, and then you have to make a decision, it's ready. And even when you think it's ready, it's not ready. Each time I've submitted a manuscript that I've said it's done, it wasn't done. And I'm just amazed that when I look back at what I thought was done, it was not done. So that's part of the process. And somebody asked me about writing groups. I didn't finish answering that question. Writing groups are helpful because you can get the independent opinion of other people that want to be writers. And providing you're not in a destructive writing group, where there's somebody that everybody wants to say what they want to say, and you have to have a strong enough will that if somebody tells you, you really should change the ending to the story, that if you think that the ending is right, don't change it. But if you hear it from enough people, you may want to decide that you want to change it. But that's a real hard decision. That with Art and Physics, I didn't think it was ready. This agent said it's ready. He was the one that pushed me. I didn't think it was ready. And I was at this point where I was kind of a dilettante about this. I do a little bit of writing, and I do a little writing, and I used to get invited to this New Year's Eve party by these friends. They had an annual New Year's Eve party. So it's one of that, it's like that play, same time last. Where you see these people that you never see throughout the whole year because they're friends of friends, and you see. So I would see these people once a year at this New Year's Eve party. So one year I was at this New Year's Eve party. It was 1987 or 88, And I was at this party, and I ran into this guy and his wife, and they said, "So what's new?" And I haven't seen you in a while. Oh, kids are getting rolling, you know. And I said, "Yeah, I'm writing a book." So the wife, who I barely know, said to me, "Are you still writing that book?" I said, "Beg your pardon?" She says, "Well, every time I come to this party, you tell me you're writing this book. Finish it." Shocked at the way she said it. I said, "I didn't realize how I sounded like such an asshole, that I'm writing a book." So I remember that was New Year's Eve, and then New Year's Day was the next day, and I was shaving, and I was looking in the mirror, and it was a new year, and I said, I put the razor down, looked in the mirror, and I said, "Are you going to write this book, or you're not going to write this book? And what is this bullshit? Are you going to tell people you're writing a book because it sounds good, or are you going to write the book?" So I said, someone once told me that if you write a page a day, page 30 times, and you have to discard, but I thought to myself, well, I'm going to see if I'm going to devote this 1 year and really get serious about this. And I took a vacation by myself down to Cabo San Lucas, where I just rented a beach house and stayed in the beach. I almost went nuts by myself, but I stayed there and I wrote. And by the end of the year, I had written 136 pages, which I thought was, a lot. It wasn't pretty disorganized, but at least I actually had some material there. And that's when I said, I have to take myself seriously. I'm going to do this, or I'm not going to do this. Because, there's a lot of dilettante. I can't tell you the number of cocktail parties that I go to. People come up to me and they say, "Well, I'm writing a book." Everybody's writing a book. It's amazing. Everybody's writing a book. It's an astonishing thing. So you have to decide, are you going to be serious about this or not be serious about this? And if you are going to be serious about this, you still got to get disciplined. You've got to start setting aside a certain amount of time to do it. Question?
Can you recommend a nonfiction type writers group in San Francisco? Are you in the San
I'm not in any writers groups. I mean, I just don't. I've never joined one. But I heard that there are. And there was what's that fellow? Dave Eggers has founded a writers groups, and then Ethan Kanan, the Garage or something like that. He has a writers groups, and I bet you if you contacted, where do you live, in the Bay Area?
Well, my son lives in San Francisco.
Well,
I don't know in Kansas City, but he's...
Well, I think that if you called any of the major, a lot of the bookstores, like Book Passage in Larkspur, by Elaine Petrucelli's bookstore, they have writing groups. A lot of the major bookstores now have writing groups. So you can contact the major bookstores, and if they don't, they probably will know who does. Or you might want to just check the internet, Book Passage in Larkspur. I'm sorry, Corte Madera. Corte Madera, and they have writing groups. Well, there are people that do that. There are people that do that. How do you find them? Probably the best thing is to ask around, or you might try Craigslist. Put a little notice saying, "I am a writer that writes. I'm looking for an editor. Please submit your resume." And and because it's email, you don't have to waste your time with a lot of interviews. Then just choose the ones that you think are the best, and then call them up and say, "I'd like to talk to you."
But it seems like what you said is a very specific problem that we have.
It's the hardest problem. It's the number one killer in terms of people who are pros who want to be writers. To convert what with the knowledge that you have, into lively writing after a lifetime of training to be clinically detached is the hardest thing of all. It's very difficult. Oh, so you got a question here?
You said with agents you submit, you have the whole book written first?
Well, I wrote Art and Physics when he submitted the one chapter. And I said, "What happens now?" And he said, "They want to see the rest of the book." And I said, "Well, it's not written." He said, "Write it." So rather than submit a proposal, because here's the problem with proposals. I didn't know what I was going to say. I submitted I wrote a synopsis of this book, and I thought it would be a 130-page synopsis, which was the book. But it's turned out that what they bid on this book and accepted as the book was not the book. The book has changed, it morphs, So the trouble with a proposal is that it assumes that you know what you're going to say before you know what you're going to say. So, so that's part of the problem, you know. And then I don't know how to tell you that because I've never really done it formally. I've sort of broken a lot of the rules. The number one rule of writing is write what you know about. That's the number one rule. If you're going to be a writer, don't try to write what you don't know about. But I wrote about subjects I didn't know about, you know, and they turned out to be good books because I was bringing a perspective that was different from what other people did. But, you know, my favorite is Arthur Golden, who wrote the book The Geisha Girl. I mean, the Geisha. Here's this Jewish boy from New York, puts himself in the mind of a 1930s Japan geisha girl, and when you're in the book, you're like, oh my God, you know, you're living this girl's life, and you think to yourself, how did he do this? I have a great Arthur Golden story. When he wrote the book, it became a #1 bestseller. It was the New York Times bestseller list. So he had a book agent, and they said that they want to option it for the movies. So his book agent said, you need to get a movie agent because movie agents are different than book agents. So he got a movie agent, and the movie agent said to him, do you have a cell phone? No, the movie agent goes, he says, we're having lunch tomorrow with Steven Spielberg, who wants to option your movie. So he says, Steven Spielberg, oh my God. So they said to the movie agent, says, do you have a cell phone? He says, well, no, I don't know. I don't even own a cell phone. He said, well, you have to go buy a cell phone right now because I need to be able to get a hold of you immediately. This stuff moves very, very fast. So Golden buys himself his first cell phone, you know, and he has lunch with Steven Spielberg, and he's like this far off the ground because they're going to make a movie out of this thing. And he's staying at the Hyatt, you know, because he's now made so much money from the book, he can stay in really fancy hotels. So he tells this story how he's walking through the lobby of the Hyatt, and he's so excited, he calls his literary agent, and he says, you're not going to believe this. I've just had lunch with Steven Spielberg, and he's just optioned my movie. They're going to make a movie of the geisha. And she said, there's a lot of background noise. Where are you calling me from? He says, well, I'm in the lobby. She says, so let me see if I understand this correctly. You're an asshole. He says, I beg your pardon? She says, you're walking through the lobby of a hotel talking about a movie deal on a cell phone. You must be an asshole. I thought, because if you're in LA, you would understand how many people are walking through lobbies. I mean, I was in the Burbank airport, and this asshole, you know, on a cell phone was going on and on and on, talking at the top of his lungs about some movie deal. And I thought myself, asshole. Question?
Are you thinking of a proposal and a query letter as the same?
A proposal and a query letter. I'm not, because I've never done those. I wouldn't even know the difference. You know, I mean, an agent is the person that could direct you in that. You know, and there are books that tell you how to do that too. You know, there's some how-to books. You know.
Query letter is shorter.
Huh? It's a query letter, yeah. Yeah. I mean, you know, you wanna. To me, it's sort of like having to rewrite the book or overwrite the book. You know.
How long is reasonable for an agent? It seems there's an exclusivity kind of relationship with an agent.
Right.
How long is reasonable for them to shop your book?
Well, I started to tell the story about somebody who contacted me that they had a book. Oh, I remember. Yeah, it was a wonderful book. This young man asked me, I don't know if he's young, it could be an old man for all I know, but he said, would you please read this book and give me a blurb? And I actually started reading it. It was a very good book. And I gave him a very nice blurb. And then he wrote me and he said, you know, I can't get this book published. He said, my agent has been showing it to academic presses. I said, fire your agent. Get rid of this agent. This book starts out by saying, I'm not an academic, but I got something to say. I said, anybody that starts out a book like that, and then this asshole agent is showing the book to academic presses, like university presses, not going to happen, you know. So you have an agreement with the agent, and the trouble is that the agent, if they show the book to a bunch of publishers, and they reject it, and then you change agents, and then you come back with the same book. Of course, you know you know that wonderful story about some guy got rejected from his book so many times that he took a Thomas Wolfe story, changed the name, and submitted it. And they got rejected by all the publishing houses, you know. And then, of course, you know, it was a famous book, you know, and then the editors didn't even know what the hell they're reading, you know. So So you could, I suppose, change the name and the title and do a nom de plume, and they probably wouldn't even know the difference. But you know, if the agent holds the book for too long and keeps getting rejected, then you may have to switch agents. You know. Question, Nick?
If you have a proposal, and you may not be able to this, but if you have a proposal, can you submit it to several agents at once, or do you have to time and wait for them?
That's a tricky question too. Usually you just have to work with, I know that I was trying to work at one point with more than one agent, and apparently I was told that's a no-no. Sort of like working with more than one real estate agent, you know. You can only work with one at a time. Yeah, you get a bad rep if you do that. You can't submit it to a whole bunch of different agents. You're supposed to do it, but I'm not sure. Maybe you can. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that because I just don't have any experience with that. You had a question here.
Are you getting faster?
Yeah, I am. The first book took me almost 10 years to write. The next book took me 6 years to write. This book took me 4 years to write. And Viking said to me, "We are convinced this book is going to be a success. We must follow up immediately with another book. You write 2 long books. We want you to write a short book. Can you write a 200-page book or less and get the manuscript on our desk by August 4th, 2004, August 1st, 2004. So I said, I don't know if I can do that. And they said, we will give you $75,000 to write 25 pages, $3,000 a page. I can do that. Because they know that if I write 25 pages, I'm on. I'm started. The hardest part, of course, is writing the first 25 pages. But if they can get you into the book, then they know that you'll write the book. So they're holding this dangling this carrot. And you know what? I've been trying to write these 25 pages for the last 3 months, and I haven't been able to do it because I've been so busy with everything that's involved with this. And I can't. And my agent keeps calling me, "Where is the 25 pages?" Because he gets his percentage. You know, and he says, "My God, this is such easy money. Write 25 pages." And I said, "I can't do it. I have to wait till the book comes out, and then I can have some time to do the writing." Question way in the back there, the green. You. Hard because they, you know, there's that book that you can buy in all the bookstores about agents, and it's all very general. They tell you, and you know, and then you've got to watch out for the predator agent that is making their living by saying, "Give me a reading fee of $500 or $1,000. I'll read your manuscript," and then, of course, you know, they give it a cursory glance and tell you rejected, and then, of course, you know, you don't really even know whether you got a fair shot at it or not. But the best thing to do is to do by word of mouth, you know, and talk to other people and find out. And you know, agents are constantly deluged with other books. I mean, I gave out my agent's name. He may kill me for doing that, but I know that he's always on the lookout for good writers and good stuff. So, you know, it's an exclusive agreement for a set period of time. It goes on for a certain period of time, and then if he lands the contract, then, you know, like, I'm his meal ticket now for the rest of. As long as these books sell, every check goes to him. He gets, and I negotiated after the first book. I said, 15% is too high. You know, we have to renegotiate this because I don't think it's fair. I mean, for the first book, I can understand paying you 15%, but once I'm an established author, I shouldn't have to pay you 15% anymore. Question?
I wondered about the integration of the images in the Word and whether you had the images picked out and if you submitted those when you submitted that.
No, I never even submitted images at all. Images were always the afterthought. I mean, like I put images in this book because I like to put images in books. I think that, you know, books should have images, and I spent a lot of time choosing just the right image, but I have to pay for all that. That's out of my pocket. And what I learned is that the museums are also hard pressed. That when I got permissions for all the images for this book, they were like $35 to $50 to get permission. And then when I went for the images for this book, they got smart because Gates went ahead and bought up most of the images. And then the permissions were then $75 to $200. And I spent almost $7,000 on getting permissions for this book. I mean, there were so many. Is that God talking? but it was very expensive, and that's something that the writer has to do. And I have to tell you that getting permissions is as writing to some museum in Crete that only has its fax machine on between the hours of 9 and 11, and getting back all these foreign languages and going down to the bank and writing bank drafts in all these weird currencies to get the permissions is an enormous pain in the ass. I mean, it's just terrible. But I felt it was worth it, and I wanted to get just the right image, so I did that. Question? I don't get it. I mean, I read that general, the question is co-writing books. Richard Lannon and Thomas Lewis and Armini wrote that book, The General Theory of Love. So I had dinner with Richard Lannon, and I said, how did the three of you guys write a book? He said, we nearly killed each other. He said they each originally assigned different sections to write, and one guy was sort of had the overview of the writing. But Michelangelo didn't have a partner. I mean, there are people that can do that. I mean, some people co-write books, and it seems to work out very well for them. I'm trying to figure out. I'd love to find a co-writer. I mean, I just have a friend of mine, Mike Samuels, who wrote that book, the Woman's Body book, or what was it called again? It was a huge bestseller. The Woman's, it was in the 60s or 70s, something like that. Anyways, he's written around 12 books, and he has a woman now that he works with, and she does most of the writing. And he just kind of gives her the idea, and they work together, and he's churning out one book after another. And I said, maybe this is the way I should go. Maybe I should see if I can find somebody that I can work with to get this done faster. Because the limiting factor is time. I just don't have enough time to do it, But how do you do that? I don't know. It's very difficult. Question way in the back? I'm sure, well, all of the big ones do it. I mean, I learned that one of the big syndicated columnists doesn't even write her columns. I mean, she's hired these fancy Harvard grads, and they do all the research. They come up with the ideas. They do most of the writing. She looks it over at the final end and puts her name on the end of it, and comes out as her column. I mean, and that's the way, like Borstein, who writes all these wonderful books, The Creators, The Discoverers. He has a whole stable of research assistants that help him write the book. That's why when that big thing blew up last year with Doris Kearns Goodwin and Stephen Ambrose, and they said, oh, it wasn't plagiarism, it was just sort of sloppy. I mean, that's bullshit. I mean, if you're going to lift something out of somebody else's book, I don't believe that was just an accident. And either that or somebody's ghostwriting your books. They're not writing them, which is intellectually dishonest. And by the way, Viking told me, they said, given the brouhaha about those plagiarism scandals last year, they said, you must attribute every single thing that you put in this book. If you take it from somebody else, you have to give them credit. We don't want to have a scandal, So I mean, it was like, I never was told that on the other two books, but because that was the climate that this was happening in, this became a very important issue.
When you go with the permission for the images, when you ask for permission to a museum, do you have to show them what they're going to be in?
No, what you have to do is you have to tell them what size image, eighth page, half page, quarter page. You have to tell them you want it in black and white or color. You have to tell them what's the print run of the book, and what you want to tell them is the lowest print run possible, which is 10,000, because if it's a big print run, then it goes up by that, And I felt a lot of these images, as far as I'm concerned, should be part of the public domain. It's an outrage that so many of these things are still not in the public domain.
What happens after you're starting to publish 100,000?
Well, then they'll come back to you and they'll say, we want our pound. I haven't had that happen yet. I don't think that any of these museums have the staff to be tracking you down, but I imagine it could happen. But like for instance, I showed a lot of images in the show, in my presentation yesterday, and I don't bother getting permission from it. My God, if I got permission for 400 images, I couldn't put that lecture on. So I had one woman come to one of my lectures, and I used an image of the moon from her book, and she was outraged. She said, you're using my image, and you didn't pay me for it. I said, "No, it didn't." I said, "I'll take it out." So her partner said, "Well," I said, I can't afford to pay $300. She wanted $300 to use the image. I said, "I can't pay you $300 to use that image and pay $300 for 400 images. My God, you're talking about a fortune." So the partner said, "Well, leave the image in, because he'd rather have the exposure, even though it's going to run past for a couple of seconds, rather than not have it, I mean, so I've been able to get away with it, but it's a very thorny problem, and I'm never quite sure what's the best way to deal with it. Because, I like to use images, and so many of them, and it's somebody else's work, you think, well, gee, I'm using their work, they should get paid for it. But on the other hand, it's so cumbersome, I mean, I wouldn't be able to use the images.
I assume you do that afterwards, like, for example, you're creating and you think, I want to use this image, you just put it there for now, and then later when it's published.
Yeah, because what happens is so many images that you think you're going to use, you decide not to use, or they don't want to use it, and the images is such a fluid thing, keeps changing all the time. Question?
Yeah. What if you use quotes like from dead poets or Shakespeare?
If it's in the public domain and it's less than 250 words, you don't have to get permission. If it's over 250 words, and you're quoting a book, and you have to go to the, you'll see in the front of books all the time, we acknowledge this publisher because they own the copyright, and if you're going to quote another author, then you have to get permission. But if you're going to quote Shakespeare, or Wordsworth, you don't have to get permission.
So how do you find out which are in the public domain and which aren't?
The publisher will tell. Well, I say, how do you find that out? Well, I find it out because I don't use any quotes over 250 words. I don't want the hassle of having to do that. Plus the fact I don't like real long quotes of other writers in the middle of somebody else's book. I've seen it. Some guy's quoting 2 pages of somebody else's work. Cone it down to get the essence of what that guy said, rather than show 2 pages. Question? Where do I get them from? Well, I don't know if you've seen them in the little in all the stationery stores have these little things with a little razor blade on it, for cutting things out of magazines and whatnot. So I have one of those things. I carry it around with me. And what I do is whenever I'm coming over here on the airplane, I get all these magazines that I subscribe to, New Scientist, the Smithsonian, National Geographic, and I'll take them with me on the plane, and when I see a knockout image, put it in a folder, take it home, scan it in my scanner, put it into PowerPoint, and now the image is in the program. So. And if it's an art book, I have a huge collection of art books at home that I'm always reviewing because, see, when I lecture, when I do a presentation, I'm trying to pass on information while at the same time being entertaining. So the information that people take in and ideas are usually channeled into the left brain. It's a logical argument I'm making. So the left brain is following this logical argument. So the right brain is idling. It's not doing anything very much. So if you show an image that's a metaphor, like if I show that Magritte viol, that man's face that's a woman's torso, when I'm talking about how adolescent boys are sex crazed, I've created a metaphor and an image for what I'm saying. So the right hemisphere is perceiving the image, taking that in metaphorically, while the left hemisphere is hearing what I'm saying and listening to what I'm saying logically. And I think that you can get a message across much more effectively if you engage both hemispheres of the brain than if you just engage one hemisphere. So that's my style of presenting, and it's proven to be very effective because I got a lot of very positive feedback. So, question?
When you started writing, you said one of the most important things is to figure out who your audience is.
Right.
When you started, very first book, did you say, this is going to be a general, this will go out?
When I first started writing, I started writing short essays. I just started writing about things that interested me because I wanted to see how I knew how to write. Writing is like anything else. It takes a lot of practice before you know what you're doing. It's like surgery, it's like any skill. It's like this fabulous pianist that showed us her skills today. She started with scales. She did simple pieces first. So you need to just start writing, and just you may not even write for anything. What I was doing is writing these little essays, and one day it occurred to me that all these essays that I had been writing were kind of interrelated. And I was driving home one day, and I suddenly started to occur to me that I actually had the essence of a book, because all of them, you know, Art and Physics was about right brain, left brain. It's about Asian art and Western art. It was about, you know, physics and art. And suddenly I said, you know, this all kind of fits together. And I wove it together in a book, even though when I set out to do it, I didn't start out to do that. So I think that if you're going to start out, you just need to start writing, you know, and just try it out, you know, and try to write, and then when it'll become clear as to what you're writing, because a lot of times you don't know what you're writing until you write it.
I've got in my head what I want to do, but it's like Young's loves executioner. And
Right.
you say, is that for the mass audience, or is that more specialized?
Well, you can start a book. Well, you have to. It doesn't matter, because you just start writing the book. And after you start writing the book, if you think it's being written for a specialized audience, and then once you start writing it, you say to yourself, you know, maybe this could be for a general audience. You can go back and change it. You know, you could, you know, soften it and take out a lot of the jargon and whatnot. So that decision can change while you're writing. But in the beginning, it's a good idea to first say, who am I writing this for? Who's going to buy this? You know.
Along that same line, it seems like now you're ending up in the academic world. Did you start out that way thinking that's what you're going to do?
I'm shocked. I mean, the academics were the people that attacked me the most on every book, and I find it just so ironic that they're being used as textbooks now. I mean, I had art history professors attack me, physicists say, who the hell do you think you are to write about my field? You know, if somebody came to me and was writing a book about surgery, and they're not a surgeon, I'd say, who the hell are you to write about my field? What do you know about my field? So it's a very dangerous thing to do, number one. It's a lot of chutzpah. And number two, the people that are in the field don't like it. So, like for instance, when I wrote Alphabet versus the Goddess, and I've got a chapter on Mesopotamia, a chapter on Egypt, a chapter on the early Bible, chapter on the Protestant Reformation. So what I did is I called Berkeley, I called the Department of Mesopotamia, and I said, I'd like to speak to the assistant professor of, so I get this person on the phone, and I said, I have a 16-page chapter on ancient Mesopotamia, and I would like to pay you $200 to read it, just to read it through and tell me if I'm saying something really stupid or that you can't say or whatnot. And they'd say, well, who are you? And I said, well, I'm a surgeon. I've written a previous book, and and they say, well, why are you writing a book about this? And I said, well, it's kind of a long story, but but could you just do this, and I'll pay you for it. And then there would come the point in the sentence, the point in the conversation when I knew what was coming next. Well, let me think about this. I'll do it under the condition. I said, yes, yes, not to mention your name in the acknowledgments, because they don't want to be mentioned. They don't want to be associated with anything that might ruin their career. So they're very, very leery about, so there are all these people that read, they didn't gonna have any credits in the acknowledgments because they didn't want it, because they think that I might be a flake, and I could be, Whenever I read a review that starts out, this California surgeon says, the code word is California means I'm a flake, and surgeon means I'm out of my depth, So when I see a review that starts out with those two words, I know it's not going to be a good review,
Well, who were you writing to? What was your audience in your mind?
Well, general public. I figured that, when I told people I was writing a book about art and physics, their eyes would blaze up. Writing a book about what? And they said, well, who would read a book like that? Who would publish a book like that? And I said, there is an audience for that. And sure enough, it turned out that this book is just cranking along. It's been out 13 years now, and I get royalty checks that keep going up. And what that means, if they're going up after 13 years, is that the book keeps selling by word of mouth. And which gets me to another point I want to make, and that is, when I first wrote Art and Physics, I said, how do you sell books? What sells books? Is it ads in the paper? Is it radio program interviews? Is it bookstore appearances? And I couldn't find out from anybody what the answer to that question was. And finally, one person said, if you can put this book in the hands of 10,000 people, and they like this book, they'll sell the book. And some woman, I don't know if she's here today, but stopped me yesterday and she said, you have no idea how many copies of Alphabet versus the Goddess I've sold for you. I should be on your payroll. She says, I've been buying this as gifts for people and recommending it. And I'm thinking to myself, that's how books get sold. Is that, and you know, you're talking to somebody and they say, God, I just read this great book, you should read it, you know? So most people read books or go to movies based on other people's recommendations, not on what the ads say or what something else is like that. Question? About the what?
At UC Berkeley in art and physics.
Yes.
And you talked about your daughter being the impetus.
Right.
Started.
Right.
Was being very much younger than she is now. I'm curious. You were the art photography. You were going to museums.
Right. Right. Well. Yeah, she actually designed, if you want to see where she is, go visit the website for Sex, Time, and Power, Alphabet versus the Goddess. She married Albert Brooks in Hollywood, and she's his wife, has 2 children, has a very successful web design company, and designs websites. She's a fantastic writer and a artist. My youngest daughter, Tiffany Schlane, founded the Webby Awards in San Francisco, which are now worldwide, and she just made a movie that got accepted to Sundance about pro-choice. So she's an artist, and her husband is a professor of robotics at Berkeley, and he was in the Whitney Biennial and the Venice Biennale because he's an artist. He does internet art, and it's amazing. You know, these kids have done really great. Which reminds me, the preface of my book, of all 3 of the books, is very personal. I feel like the preface of a book should be telling the audience who you are. And tell them a little story about you that makes you human. So in all 3 books, I've told a personal story, and then I'll switch to a different authorial voice when I get into the book. But I feel that the preface should be, okay, here's who I am, here's what my credentials are to write this book. This is why I think you should read it. So I think that the preface has to have a totally different tone than the actual book itself. Any other questions? Question in the back? Boy, isn't that the hardest? See, everybody, I'm sure everyone here has been to committee meetings. And you know that in a committee meeting, everybody wants to talk. Everybody wants to hear themselves talk. And most people don't have anything to say. And it's the biggest problem. There's 2 problems. Number one, knowing whether you have anything really important to say. And the second thing is, how do you know what you don't know? I mean, if you're a writer and you're going to write about something, you may not know that there's somebody who's devoted their whole life to studying this problem. And you need to know who that person is to know their work. Otherwise, you're not going to be writing it in an intelligent way. And yet, it's a mysterious process. Books fall out of bookshelves that hit me on the head when I walk through bookstores. That's how I usually find out. It's the most mysterious thing. I almost think that it's almost supernatural, the way I stumble upon something I needed to know that I didn't know, you know. And knowing whether you have anything to say, the best thing to do is just start writing and you'll find out, you know, because you'll find out whether people want to read what you have to say. Any other questions? Well, it's 10 of 5. Why don't we call it a day? Thank you very much.